President, please be seated. The court is now in session. For this morning proceeding, we will continue to hear the testimony of the witness Soon Sikun, who will be questioned by the lead co-lawyers for civil parties, and then by Kim Sampon's defense team. Before I hand the floor to the party, Mr. Sakolbuti could report the attendance of the parties and individuals summoned by the chamber. Sakolbuti, Mr. President, all parties to the proceeding are present except the accused Ieng Sari, who is present in the holding cell downstairs. The accused requests to waive his direct presence through his counsel in today's proceeding. The letter of waiver has been submitted to the greffier. Regarding the reserved witness, Mr. Ong Tong Heung is in the waiting room, awaiting the call from the chamber. Thank you. The chamber will decide the two requests. First, regarding the Ieng Sari's request, as the chamber has received his request dated 8th of August 2012 through his counsel to waive his direct presence in the courtroom and instead to follow it through the audio-visual means for the entire day proceeding. Kum Som San, the treating doctor of the accused at the ECCC detention facility, examined the accused Ieng Sari this morning and observes that he is fatigued during his movement and he has backache, and recommends that the chamber so allow him to follow the proceedings through a remote means in the holding cell downstairs. And as Ieng Sari also requests to waive his direct presence in the courtroom due to his health, and as recommended by the treating doctor, for him to follow the proceeding in the holding cell downstairs, and that he is able to directly communicate with his defense, the chamber grants the request for the accused Ieng Sari to waive his direct presence in the courtroom and allowed him to follow the proceedings through audio-visual means in the holding cell downstairs, and that applies for the entire day proceeding. Every booth you are instructed to link the proceeding to the holding cell downstairs for the accused Ieng Sari to follow for the entire day. The second decision is in regards to the request to submit new document by Nunchi Defense, that is document E172/27/3. The chamber is seized of a request by Nunchi Defense team to use a new document during the examination of witness TCW 490, and that the document be placed before the chamber pursuant to Rule 87.4 of the Internal Rules. That is document E172/27/3. The chamber has repeatedly emphasized that applications to admit new evidence under Rule 87.4 must be timely. When a new document is relevant to a particular witness, the application to admit it must generally be filed 2 weeks in advance of that individual's testimony in order to be considered timely, as the Chamber clarified in its Memorandum E218. The document that Nuon Chea defense seeks to put before the Chamber has been in the public domain since April 2009. The Nuon Chea's defense application was filed on 3 August 2012, less than a week before the scheduled appearance of TCW 490. Thus, preventing any analysis of whether the Nuon Chea defense does not explain when and by what means it discovered the document, thus preventing any analysis of whether efforts to discover it could have been made at an earlier juncture. The Nuon Chea defense has therefore not satisfied the requirements of Rule 87.4, and the trial chamber rejects its request. The floor is now given to the designated civil party lawyer to put question to this witness. And before I hand the floor over, can I ask or inquire how much time do you actually anticipate to conclude your questioning of this witness, Suong Sikun?
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honours, ladies and gentlemen, as I said yesterday, I won't need more than half an hour to question the witness. A maximum of 30 minutes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Witness. Thank you, firstly, for coming this morning, despite your somewhat fragile state of health. We're going to continue the discussion we were having yesterday, which ended on a misunderstanding, I believe, and I'd like to come back to the time you spent in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Do you remember certain regional cadres going through the ministry?
First, let me say good morning, Mr. President, Your Honours, and good morning everyone in and around the courtroom. As for the base cadres transiting through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I cannot exactly recall the details.
Merci, Monsieur le Thank you, Mr. Witness. It's really not the details I'm after. It is simply knowing whether or not they transited through the ministry. But you seem to be aware that some of the regional cadres went through the ministry. I mean, are you aware of what they came to do at the ministry and why they came there in the first place?
I was not told by anyone of the reasons of their transit through MFA. However, amongst the base cadres, some were appointed to carry out the diplomatic missions for decade overseas.
Some cadres, Mr. Witness, are people about whom you have no precise idea of where they went. But do you know who it was who decided where they were allocated to and who decided when they would leave the ministry?
I did did not know, as I stated earlier, those cadres were not within the framework of my supervision.
Let's turn to another subject, Mr. Witness. This concerns the situation of children, those who are working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Was it fairly typical in the ministry for children to be separated from their parents?
In general, not only for the staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as a general measure, children were segregated from the parents for them to be in another unit.
Mr. Witness. As far as you were concerned, you who had lived abroad, was this system of separating children from their parents to put them in a different unit something that you yourself accepted? What was your reaction and feeling about this when you saw this happening?
There seemed to be no problem because within the child care center, the supervision there was also appropriate, and the one in charge also took care of the children. Even my wife could be able to go and visit our children there at the child care center. It was not too strict.
I understand that the education given to the children was a normal kind of education, but in your view, was this in fact a form of indoctrination to put them in the separate units to answer the whims of the directors of the party?
The education back then was not a concern of mine, as I trusted the party and I wanted my children to follow my path. That is, loving the country, loving the people, and sacrifice everything for the cause of the nation, the people, and the revolution.
After you had had years to meditate this, can you say that the education that was dispensed in those days had a generally positive effect on the children as they developed?
Mr. President, do I need to respond to these questions? To me, it seems it's out of the scope of the hearing. President, you must respond to this question. Witness. At that time, I did not think much about that, and the period of the decay regime was not long. And in reference to the education, the time of the regime was not long enough to see the result of that kind of education.
Merci pour votre...
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Witness. Let's move to another period and another sector. After the elections in 1993, an event occurred at the leadership level of the Khmer Rouge in June 1994. Can you have an idea of the structure and command of the Khmer Rouge at that time in 1994 to share with us?
The President Defense Council, you may proceed.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to you, sir, and good morning to everybody in this courtroom. I'm taking the floor at this stage to raise an objection. I don't believe that my learned colleague's question covers the subject of the first trial. Thank you.
Il n'y a pas de difficulté.
It's not a problem if this question does not cover the period concerned, Mr. President. I had planned for 30 minutes, but I think actually that's covered the range of questions I wanted to put, so I won't abuse on people's time. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
President, thank you. I'd like to inquire with judges of the bench if you have questions to put to this witness. Judge Lavange, you may proceed.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am Judge Jean-Marc Laverne. Good morning, Mr. Sonsikun. I have some questions to ask you, and I'm going to begin with the historical context, and I want to come back to the Funk and the Grunk. Can you tell us, Mr. Witness, if, in your view, there was a clear and joint political line between the different groups that together made up the Funk? Or was it more an alliance of convenience that brought together divergent elements? What indeed could be, in your view, the point in common between all of these groups?
When we refer to the Funk and the Grung, where Prince Sihanouk was the head of state at the time, had their clear agenda. First, within the country, the aim was to liberate the country from the grip of the imperialist Americans and their puppets, which was the Khmer Republic regime. And in the area of country construction, there was a debate and discussion, and Sihanouk wanted it to be a socialist revolution. John here, referring to the historical context, the prince back then wanted a socialist revolution, but during the debate within the Funk, and at that time Pol Pot was still in Beijing, and China opposed the word socialism, and instead it requested to build a country which is neutral, independent, and sovereign. As for the overseas view, we would adhere to the neutrality and non-alliance, and not to bend ourselves to socialist or the Western Bloc or the say-at-do, which means the Thailand, Pakistan, or the Philippines, where they were all led by the Americans. So as I recall, that was the main themes at the time.
Do you think that Prince Norodom Sihanouk's vision was the same as Pol Pot's and other members of the CPK about the future of Cambodia?
I do not know that clearly. However, through my historical observation and as a Cambodian, I am of the view that as we are born Cambodians, we have pride in our country, in our glorious history and past, and that we shall consolidate or join our forces without class splitting, without race or religious incrimination, and that we just join as one force to build a prosperous country within the current boundary of Cambodia. I think all Cambodian leaders through various stages in the history are of the same view, as they love the country and the people. Whatever happened after was not the result or the direct result of the willingness of members of the FUNC. As for Prince Norodom Sihanouk, it is my understanding that he adhered highly to this vision, and I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my great respect to Norodom Sihanouk and to apologize for what happened regarding what I said about him or about the oppressed regime or the puppet regime. And I wish him a long life so that he can be the shade of our life and the country and the people.
Bien, donc.
Yes, right. Mr. Witness, am I to understand that you are telling us today that Prince Sihanouk and Pol Pot shared precisely the same vision in the 1970s after Prince Sihanouk was overthrown? That is what I adduce from your comments anyway. In the eyes of the public, is it true that there were really 4 important people in the FUNC? Tronchin, Sihanouk, Penut, and Ieng Sari, and one in Cambodia, Kyo Sampong. At the time, and in the eyes of the public, is that the impression that people had of Funk.
Can Your Honor please repeat the first name?
I said that in the eyes of the public, there were apparently 4 important people in the Funk, 3 of whom were in China, Prince Sihanouk, Ben Nut, and Ieng Sary, and 1 in Cambodia, Kyo Sompong.
Back then, the main important person of the Fung was actually only Samdai Sihanouk, who was the head. And of course, there were subordinates, namely Samdai Panut, who was a long-time colleague and a real compatriot, whom I have great respect for him, and that I knew him personally. And inside the country, as I said earlier, there were 3. Who were respected by the general Cambodian people and the youth. That is, they were Hu Num, Hu Jun, and Kyo Sampon. Ieng Sary was not known by many people then. He was only well known within the intellectual circle.
Que pouvez-vous
What can you tell us about the relations between Ieng Sary and Prince Norodom Sihanouk? Did their relations go through difficult periods? Were there incidents that you yourself might have witnessed, or was it total harmony?
I do not know the details of the communication between these 2 elites. It is my understanding that Samdai Norodom Sihanouk had a clear vision, and he had led the country and maintains independence and peace for the last 15 years in a very complicated historical context, as well as within the political, geographical complexity, which was rather risky and dangerous. That was the great achievement by Prince Norodom Sihanouk, that he had maintained peace for the past 15 years. We had been oppressed.
Mr. Witness, could you kindly answer my question? It's a precise question. I want to know if there were any incidents that occurred between Prince Norodom Sihanouk and Ieng Sary when they were both in Beijing. Do you remember, for example, a visit by Prince Sihanouk to European countries and certain African countries in 1973? Were the conditions for that visit between the 2 individuals good or not?
It's even beyond what Your Honor has described, but actually I could not describe his personal characteristic and personal relationship at a very personal level, but in terms of working level, they work along well. For example, during the visit to foreign countries, with which I also sometimes accompanied them, I did not notice any incident or problems. It did not raise any issue, and there was only one thing that could be a problem. It was way back in 1973. Your Honor might have been aware there was a conference in Paris back then. The conference was about the United States and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam in order to negotiate the peace agreement in Paris. Back then, both Vietnam and the United States wanted the FUNC to take part in this conference as well. In consultation and coordination with the former Ronald administration. As for the resistance forces back in Cambodia, represented by Ieng Sary in Cambodia, opposed against the reconciliation between the FUNC and the former Ronald administration. And to my recollection, then Prince Norodom Sihanouk also agreed with Mr. Ieng Sary's position concerning that matter. So basically, Prince Sihanouk and Ieng Sary did agree on the national solidarity in the country. Of course, there could have been some incidents in their relations, but I could not describe because it was at their personal level. But if you look at the overall picture of the resistance, there was an agreement between them that there would be a resistance without negotiation or reconciliation with the former Republic Khmer led by Lon Nol.
And this agreement, wasn't it reached after a long period of distrust? Weren't people afraid that Prince Sihanouk might believe that it was preferable to reach a compromise? And wasn't this, in the end, let's say, a hard position that might have stirred things up?
I am of the view that it was beyond my knowledge because I was not within the leadership level. But I could only tell the court about the situation surrounding the teams with which I worked, but I can also tell the court about my overall impression and view concerning that. In order to ensure our national sovereignty and independence, and in order to lift up the living standard of people of Cambodia back then, we had to achieve the socialism, and that political line was only the target in principle. But later on, we realized that this path to prosperity was not possible. That's why we agreed that the path that we have paved so far would not be possible, and conversely, it would jeopardize the country, and particularly it would undermine the effort of the former resistant forces. And then we agreed together that we would not adhere to this path. But I would also like to emphasize that we should not be afraid that one day the Khmer Rouge regimes would come to power or so again, because that was not possible, because the path that we have gone through was treacherous and harmful. By way of analogy, if a cat which was hurt by the hot water, it would be deterred. It won't. It will be afraid of even the cold water. And I believe that everyone now concedes to living under the present administration, and what we have achieved so far is the pride of Cambodian people as a whole. We should be proud of, and what we see at the present day is some things that we believe that we are on the right track. So individual of us should continue to work together, that they should not stir up the problems, and we should try to avoid any internal strife or conflict, because it would bring the country to disaster.
Witness, I don't wish to interrupt you, but please answer my questions directly and avoid personal comment, even if they may be interesting. Now, I would like to turn to your role at the information department of the GRUNC. Can you tell me what kind of information you received and through which channels? I'm speaking about information from outside as well as information coming from Cambodia.
When I was assuming a position in the information and propaganda department within the FONC based in Beijing, China, I received information from various sources, including foreign news agencies. And basically there were three main sources. One, AFP. It's a French news agency. Two, Xinhua news agency based in China, because this is the Chinese-owned newspaper. And the third source was the internal information I received from the battlefield. I received the information from the Vietnam news agency.
So, regarding information coming from the battlefront, more specifically speaking, were you aware of the developments of the military situation in Cambodia? Were you aware of the status of the fighting and of the zones which were liberated? what were you aware of? What kind of information did you receive in that regard? Did you receive military information?
As for military information, we received, we heard it from the voice of Phong, broadcast from Hanoi. That was the domestic military development news. And we also heard from AKI agency for domestic news, and that information was also broadcast through Hanoi as well.
And on the basis of this information, was it possible to understand that when a city was taken, when a city would fall into the liberated zone, that this city would be systematically evacuated, that its population would be evacuated?
Your Honor, at that time I did not know that there was evacuation of the population when the resistance forces liberated certain region of the country. I only learned about this evacuation when I returned to Cambodia. I at that time observed that people who were evacuated from Phnom Penh, particularly those who live in the those who used to live in the city, were of a different appearance, and I noted that they were relocated in Se San, along Se San River. And I would like to try to explain the picture. I did not know whether or not Ieng Sari was aware of the evacuation, but as far as I can remember, when I was in Hanoi, at the Voice of Funk based in Hanoi, Mr. Ieng Sari opened a training course. And at that time, he introduced to us that when Cambodia was liberated, then as the resistance forces, we had to live together with the people from Phnom Penh. So we had to observe our attitude and etiquette. We had to adhere to a moral standard, and so on and so forth. There was no indication or information from him that the people were to be evacuated out of Phnom Penh at all. That's what I could answer to your question, Your Honor.
So, I can conclude from this and from the information that you received in Peking as well as in Hanoi, you could never conclude that the cities that were taken by the liberation forces would be evacuated. Or am I wrong? In no case you could conclude that. This kind of information never transpired. Is that so?
Yes, according to the sources of information, we could not know whether there was evacuation of people out of the city.
So let's move along a little bit, and I would like to return to the period when you returned to Cambodia. You said that you stayed in a place called B20. And if I understood correctly, you said that you were re-educated there. Is that true?
នៅប
At B20, I only transited it. And I met with the supervisor of that office by the name of Pum. At that time, I did not know that he was the biological brother of a former leader whom I could not recall clearly. It could have been Chenda or Kao Mani, but the supervisor of B20 was Pum. There was no re-education for me over there. I also indicated in my draft dissertation that I went there to attend day-to-day meeting, and at that time I was assigned to plant banana.
So this was not re-education, therefore.
បាទ
No, I was not re-educated over there.
President, I would like now to show the witness a document which is indexed as IS 6.9, and this is a document titled in French regarding the mastery of the political line and the gathering of the forces of the democratic forces. So this document has Khmer ERN 00072400 to 407, French 00611566 and English 00244274. President, is it possible to show this document in its Khmer version to the witness?
Yes, Judge, and court officer is instructed to present this document to the witness for his examination.
Je précise que
I wish to specify that this document is a list of directions, and this is a document that has been mentioned in several of the footnotes in the closing order. In particular, in footnote 4,456 and 4,457. So, what I would like to focus on is a first passage on page 2 in the French version, and at ERN 00244275 to 00244276 in English, in Khmer 00072 to 403. So I don't know if it is possible to display this document on the screen. Thank you, President. Your Honor, what we have here on the monitor is IS 6.2, and I thought I heard 6.9. So for the purposes of the record, we should correct this. Yes, I apologize. Indeed, it is IS 6.2.
Voilà, je vais donner.
So I'm going to read out the first part of the excerpt I wish to focus on, which reads as follows. Regarding how do things change regarding what was happening outside the country? Outside the country, there was an enormous amount of change with the following characteristics. First of all, people from the outside front had to return to the home country. They were no longer living abroad, which meant that we had put an end to this outside organization without any negative impacts. And on the contrary, our influence in the world increased. The world never imagined that this could happen in this way. Second of all, once the people from the front returned to the country, we were able to take charge of them firmly. From Penut all the way down the hierarchical line. The forces of this exterior forces did not all return, but they kept on coming in. Even Sihanouk, we were able to take charge of him as well because he had nothing left, no money, no power. Thus, he was forced to depend entirely upon us materially as well as politically. If we had to, he had more, by comparison, he is still more powerful. Before, if he left us, we would say he would die. Now, we have held him more effectively in our hands because we won over the enemy. We have everything. We take control of everything, including the royal palace. However, we can work with him easily. Nowadays, he sees that he can live with us. If such are things, he is satisfied as long as he can remain in the country for a little while and travel abroad. This is a situation that provides us with time to consolidate and develop our forces. And in the future, if he changed his mind, we would consider him as a scab which will fall on its own without any suffering. This would not be a wound. We had no concern about this, and this could only be in our favor. Thus, forming a front for these people was not difficult, and this from Penut himself. And with Sihanouk, we have to be a little bit political, but it is not as difficult than outside of the country. We even provide him with food. So, is this a document that you have already seen witness, and what can you say about it?
I have never seen the document of this kind, so I cannot comment on this document. Nevertheless, I can share with your honors that this was the policy back then.
So, according to you, these instructions correspond to a political reality that was in force during the period of democratic Kampuchea.
បាទគឺខ្លឹម
Yes, it did. It did correspond to the political policy at the time.
Alors,
So I will read out another excerpt on page 4 of the French version, and I believe it's the same in the English version. And the excerpt says the following: those from the outside, and we're speaking now about Cambodian people living outside of Cambodia, those from the outside who asked to return to the country, they are living in Europe, in Western Europe, and in the United States. They are intellectuals. Our principle is that we must mobilize them as many as possible. It is up to them how to return. We have to mobilize these people for them not to remain abroad, which would make us lose ground politically. They said that we could not mobilize them. The Americans sent some of them back. If they came, what will we make them do? We will make them do labor work. If they had come in 72, 73, 74, they were forced to perform manual labor as well. If they came now, they should engage in manual labor as well. These forces are only peripheral. However, we also must train them and re-educate them in the new society and in the new movement. So, doesn't this mean that those who must return must necessarily be re-educated, and that this re-education means labor, and more specifically speaking, quote-unquote, physical labor?
President, court officer is instructed to ensure that the document is removed from the computer screen and the hard copy document be withdrawn from the witness.
បាទគឺ
Yes, that was the case because intellectual had to go through re-education and labor work, such as cultivation.
ហើយទន្ទឹម
And at the same times, they had to undergo the political and consensusness training.
et
the need to raise the level of consciousness through work, was that explained to the intellectuals who were planning to come back to Cambodia, or were things presented to them as being entirely wonderful and not requiring any efforts of that kind?
I did not know whether before their returning to Cambodia, those who were in charge of the front or the party gave them any specific instructions. While I was in Beijing, while I was awaiting the trip to return to Cambodia, I and a few other intellectuals tries to engage in physical activities, including exercising, so that we prepped ourselves for long-distance walk and intensive labor work. As we already prepared ourselves psychologically and mentally, but when it comes to physical labor, we did not have that kind of readiness. That was for the purpose that we hope that when we were to be arriving in Cambodia, we will be able to engage in such labor.
Alors,
This is dated 22 September 1975, the directive here. And in the same month, Mr. Yang Sari was in Paris and in New York, where he attended the United Nations General Assembly, and he made a certain number of public statements. Did you accompany him to France and to the United States? And as far as you remember, did Yang Sari talk about the possibility of required physical labor for all intellectuals when they got back?
At that time, I accompanied him, and we traveled through Paris in order for him to attend the United Nations General Assembly to be held in New York. But I cannot recall the content of his meeting with students in Paris.
Is this memory loss, witness, or simply because you were not there, or do you simply not want to remember?
Does it mean, John, means that I don't want to talk about that? But as far as I know, I am the one who speaks the most about the Khmer rules. So far, there has been no other intellectuals who speak a lot about the Khmer rules. And I do not gain anything from speaking out. I just like people to understand what happened, and not for the purpose of mitigating the circumstances for other people or individuals. And if your honor know me personally clearly and my background, of course I don't want to reveal that here in the courtroom, but you would know that if I am a person who will say what I know, it doesn't mean I don't want to say, but you can say it's a memory loss. It's been more than 30 years, almost 40 years. I can only recall that he held a meeting in Paris, and I attended that meeting. And those who attended the meetings, as I said, whether they were invited or not, they would attend, because at that time the students' movement was very strong. And that's all I can recall. And while we arrived in Cambodia, some of them did face certain difficulties, and there were others who did not return to Cambodia. And I know some of them clearly. Those who did not come were those groups who always accompanied the Prime Minister wherever he went. So, in fact, they are those who are currently helping to rebuild Cambodia, and I know them all. And, Your Honor, do you want to know what they say about me? You know, they always say, I don't care about whether it's a red or a white or a blue. I only stick to my profession. If I am an engineer working on the road or the construction, I just focus on that. Then any regime would accept me to work. But my view at that time was the opposite. My view was that, number one, we are the red, and number two, we are the experts. So we came into contradiction with those people. This is a personal matter, but I just like to let you know. And you know why I survived until today, if you know? It's Dr. Tung Vien rather, who lived in the South Vietnam, as Ieng Sary did at the time. We had different views as he supported the Lonol regime. However, when I became desperate while I lived in Malay, and that I had to undergo a surgery in Bangkok, suddenly, out of the blue, he gave me a phone call, and at that time he was in Paris. And I did not know that he actually arrived in Phnom Penh. Mr. President, I'd just like to take a moment to say that the person who actually rescued me was not a Khmer Rouge cadre. It was actually a political enemy. And what's the reason behind that? And actually it was through one of my friends who was a French national. And Your Honor, you are also a French national. And that's what happens to me. I say all this in order for you to understand. Because when we are Cambodians, we have to reflect on our nature. And if the Khmer Rouge did a mistake, or the Pol Pot did a mistake, it was the difference between the Khmer against the Red. So, of course, we would back the Khmer against the Red. And we have to really understand that clearly. We have to know the distinction between the two. Because I don't know how much longer I can live. And what I wrote in the book, the President, Mr. Witness, I think that is enough. You are again reminded to hear, to listen to the question clearly and limit your response to that. If you make your comments further off the scope of the question put to you, the difficulty is yourself. Then that you would be requested to respond to more and more questions. And only two parties concluded their questioning time. And the floor is now given to the judges of the bench, so please try to save time and your energy. And if your comments are out of the scope of this trial, then it will not be considered and be dismissed, as it will not help us trying in our effort to ascertaining the truth. Because in the proceeding, every party attempts to seek the truth based on their obligation as a party to the proceeding. And they have different roles to play, trying to find the evidence for and against the accused. Therefore, please limit your response to the question that you are asked.
Witness, I have other questions to ask you, so please keep your answers as concise and direct as possible. According to you, how many inhabitants were living in Phnom Penh during the period of Democratic Cambodia?
There is no document stating to that effect, but I heard it from other peoples, one from another, and roughly there were about 2 million people residing in Phnom Penh.
We may have misunderstood each other. I think that the figure of 2 million that you've just mentioned is the number of inhabitants when Phnom Penh fell, but my question to you was the number of inhabitants during the period of Democratic Cambodia after the liberation of Phnom Penh.
There is no problem in the translation. The witness stated clearly that there were 200,000 inhabitants. There is a huge difference between 200,000 and 2 million. The witness does not have to respond again. In the Khmer language, he said roughly 200,000 inhabitants.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Witness, can you expatiate a little bit more on the atmosphere that there was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs during the Democratic Cambodia period? You've told us a lot about the people who disappeared and who were arrested, but, for example, are you aware of cases of individuals who might have committed suicide?
As I recall, there was a case of suicide. That person was of a Jarai ethnicity. He was a head of a department under the charge of Koitun, who was the head of the North Zone. Koitun was later smashed. I cannot recall the name of that person. He came to work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I did not know his exact duty there. However, I attended a meeting. The nature of the meeting was for those who were responsible before the party, and not necessarily means the party's members. And there were Ieng Sari, So Hong, Pi Poon, and there could be also Madame So Sai, who was the secretary. At that time, that person was seriously criticized as he was close to Koitun, who had been smashed. Ieng Sari or I did not really criticize him that seriously, but it was his close colleagues who criticized him heavily and requested him to make a clear self-criticism. But he did not respond to the criticism, and later on, people said he committed suicide. So the news was rather consistent, as he was of a Jarai ethnicity who had a strong self-belief. And if I were in the same situation, maybe I would do the same, as people who were close to us criticized us heavily. And what's the purpose of continue living? That was the only case, to my knowledge, regarding suicide. The President of the Council, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a point of clarification. We heard in English 200,000. And I understand that you indicated that the witness said 20,000. This was earlier to the previous question. So we first heard 2 million. Then in English it came out as 200,000. We understand, though, however, Mr. President, that you corrected, when you intervened, you indicated that in Khmer it was very clear, and in Khmer, I'm told, it was 20,000. So perhaps we need some clarification for the record, because this would go to the credibility of the witness.
Monsieur.
Witness, just so that we can be clear on this point, because indeed in French we did not hear the figure of 20,000. Can you just tell us again exactly, in your view, how many people were living in Phnom Penh during the Democratic Kampuchea period?
As I said, there was around 20,000 inhabitants. And allow me to say that they were not ordinary civilians. They were mostly workers, soldiers, or you can say they were public servants.
Thank you. On the question of the number of people living in Phnom Penh, or more broadly in Cambodia itself, do you know if the Democratic Kampuchea authorities actually carried out censuses of the population? Were people asked in the zones and the cooperatives how many people were living in their zones and cooperatives?
There was no census. Actually, the statistics gathered as a result of the writing of a biography.
Sur un autre sujet, Monsieur le témoin,
when you were working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, witness, were you told that certain foreign countries or international institutions had offered the representatives of Democratic Kampuchea either financial or food assistance for the population of Cambodia? Were you ever told about offers of this nature?
It was in 1975. The OPEC organization offered to assist Cambodia in the amount of $5 million US. And that is a grant without a condition. But I cannot recall clearly. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ieng Sary said there is no politics involved because OPEC comprises of member countries who were rich. So we could actually accept that financial offer. But as far as I know, we did not or we reject that financial offer.
Was it accepted?
As I said, we did not accept it because Pol Pot rejected it.
Witness, do you know if during this period human rights defense bodies such as Amnesty International were in contact with the leaders of Democratic Cambodia?
I do not know. If there was a contact, it could be through Paris or New York. So again, I say I do not know about whether they contacted the representative or not. It's not part of my duty.
Within your responsibilities, were you in contact with Office 870, and what kind of contact did you have, and who were your counterparts there?
There was no such contact because we were two separate bodies. One was the party and one was the administration.
Vous n'avez
So you never sent any documents to Office 870? You never sent any articles to Office 870? You never sent any translations to Office 870?
The documents could have been sent to Office 870 under my section, but I personally did not send the documents to that office. It could be my subordinates because it's going to go through a chain of command.
Et vous, à qui
Who did you report to? Who did you hand your work into?
My superior back then was Ieng Sary.
Donc tout ce
So everything that you prepared was sent to Ieng Sary
et à personne d'autre.
and to nobody else.
That depended on a specific task. Some tasks were directly given to me to my section by Pol Pot. So if that was a case, then nothing would go through Ieng Sary.
Et alors, comment
So how did you manage when you were transmitting your documents to Pol Pot?
The transmission went through the secretariat, and Madame Sosa was the head in that secretariat. She was also the party secretary.
In your work in the Information and Propaganda Service in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, were you meant to undertake reviews and analyses of foreign press, especially when there were articles about Democratic Kampuchea or about the leaders of Democratic Kampuchea?
There was a magazine or a pictorial magazine, but it was not made by my section. It could be other cadres from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs participated in its publication, but it was not within my section.
est-ce que selon
In your view, when Ieng Sary was interviewed abroad, did he ask his services to check what was published after the interview?
No. If he interviewed with a journalist, the text of that interview would not be published in the country. If there was such a publication, it would be done elsewhere, not within my section.
n'est pas bien
No, I don't think you understood what I was saying, witness. Basically, I'm asking when Ieng Sary was interviewed by a reporter outside the country, and then that interview was published in a paper outside the country, did Ieng Sary ask his services to check and possibly send to him the contents of the article as published? Is that clear?
As I said, it did not go through my section. If the interview was made overseas, I would have known of that through the publication in the newspapers.
So, for example, articles that might have appeared in papers such as Der Spiegel in Germany or L'Espresso in Italy, are these articles that you might have been informed about?
No, I was not informed.
Well, thank you, witness, for your patience and for the answers you were kind enough to provide to us. I have no further questions to put to you.
President. Thank you, Judge. The time is now appropriate for an adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn for 20 minutes and we will resume at 10 to 11. Court officers is instructed to facilitate the place for the witness and his duty counsel to rest during the break and have them back before us by 10 to 11. The court is now adjourned. All rise.